Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, my name is Gary Wasaykeesic from Michigan. Friends of the disappeared.
Friends and relatives of the
Friends
disappeared.
and relatives of the disappeared. Yes, I'm a part of this group, and I take a real personal interest because I have. I'm starting to find out quite a few stories on my own, and I'm starting to realize quite a bit the whole total impact of the residential schools.
Hi, I'm Carrie Lester. I'm with the Friends and Relatives of the Disappeared in the Toronto branch. My story brings me to this group from my own family's history. My great-great-grandfather and his brother were in the residential school in Brantford, the Mush Hole. They grew up there for most of their life, and then my great-great-grandfather, John Robert Lickers, became a school teacher and then a truant officer to the Mush Hole. And I found that information out just in the past few years while meeting up with people like Kevin Annett and his research. And my grandmother herself did not grow up in the residential school, but she was institutionalized in an orphanage, and as did her two children, my mother and her sister. And that's where I come in with all this. Thank you.
And my name's Kevin Annett. I'm a former United Church minister working with residential school survivors for about 15 years now, closer to 20 actually. The residential schools were set up in the 1890s by government and church joint operation. There had been residential schools operating before that. As far as the Mush Hole, the Mohawk Institute in Brantford, Ontario was the first one, 1825 I believe, in that era. But the government stepped in to sanction all of them in the late 1880s, early 90s, because the railway was expanding into Canada and there had to be a way to get Native people off the land quickly, especially in the West. So these schools were really internment camps to give the final blow to Native culture, to destroy them. And it was a law that every Native child had to go into these schools. They were run by the Catholic and Protestant churches, Catholic, Anglican, United Church of Canada primarily, and half the children never came back. The schools lasted right up until the 1980s. The last one closed in 1996. Under the law, if you didn't put your child in one of these schools, you'd go to jail. There was a law passed in 1920 in across Canada that said that every Native child had to be in these internment camps. And so it's a terrible legacy. In fact, when you look in any Native family, a lot of the problems are related to the destruction of the culture and people that happen in these institutions. And another point I want to make too is that it wasn't confined to Canada. You had a similar system operating in the United States. The Catholic Church had the same system wherever they were operated around the world. That's why part of our work is to expand and to link up with groups in other countries so that we can really look at this as a global system of genocide, and the effects are continuing. The apology was issued by the Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, read in Parliament June 11, 2008, and it made a very general statement of regret that children had been taken from their homes and that a lot of destruction had been caused by the schools. It was limited basically to that general statement, but it wasn't accompanied by any discussion of who was responsible. The churches were never mentioned once in the apology, even though they ran the schools. If they were at the same time they made the apology, they announced that there would be no criminal charges laid, and at the same period, over half the residential school survivors had already been disqualified for receiving any kind of compensation. So on the one hand, there's all this talk. In reality, there was nothing really being done, and still is nothing really happening on the ground to help people recover from this, because frankly, the whole thing is set up to protect the perpetrators and make sure the churches and the governments aren't held accountable, and then after that happens, they can talk about healing all they want. It doesn't really make any difference to people.
Yeah.
What do you think about the apology?
I'd like to take that apology.
Yeah, and what was it and why
I'd
wasn't
like to
enough?
take that apology and rip it apart. No, it was all plagiarized. There was no, to me, and a few other people, it wasn't really, there was no meaning to it. It was copied, it was plagiarized, there was other political leaders copied off the same pages and expressed their sorrow to the Native people off the same page. So there was no real meaning to it. There was no what would you say? No
honesty.
Was,
and no passion.
There was no real passion to it. There was no they couldn't even come up with their own words to say sorry.
You can see it wasn't from the heart.
Yeah, it wasn't from the heart. It wasn't from the.
And also there was no action that followed from it. Apology too, if you look at it under the law, an apology, when it's issued in the way it was a way to say that we're not liable. Really, that's inherent in the apology, that we're sorry for what happened, but we're not liable for anything, and we're not going to press charges against anybody. So in effect, an apology is a step backwards, because it's a way to let people off the hook and let most of white Canada feel that they've done something. That's the attitude now. People are complacent, thinking, well, we've resolved this issue. What more can you do?
Even our own people are complacent. Exactly. Yeah. Even our own people are. It's up to the point where they don't even want to do nothing now. And it's one of the things is that what I told you just a little while ago. The greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor, or one of the strongest weapons in the hands of the oppressor, is the mind of the oppressed. And that's exactly what's been happening within the Greater Toronto Area, and that's been what's happening within quite a few parts in this country. Our own people have been either beaten into submission, or they've given up. They've given up hope. They've given up quite a bit of. The will to fight is not there no more. We've seen it when we do demonstrations. We've seen it when we do rallies. We've seen it when we do. The government is actually accomplishing with this assimilation project to this day. The residential schools and the reserves, man, are Native people's concentration camps. How come nobody just says it outright? Because that's what it's been. They created these places because they wanted to get at the gold, at the diamonds, and at the land, in the ore, the land, the trees. And what better way to do that than to incarcerate people? Native people are the most incarcerated people in Canada. We have more Native children in the children's aid system now than we ever did in the residential school system. And then we have people in mental institutions. We have people in training schools, foster homes, group homes. To this day, the abuse and the assimilation project is still in full effect. It didn't end. We're still experiencing it today.
This carries on. You can have all the apologies you want, but the system of racism and genocide continues.
Yeah. Stories are out there. The memories are out there. People have the memories. They're painful memories. My own mother, when she was growing up, her father was a very abusive man, and she didn't want to pursue the abuse that he laid upon her. It was sexual abuse. And so I can see why some people want to back away from those horrible memories. But there are some people with the courage who are ready to come forward with that information, especially over the past few years since the apology has been made and it has been brought to the attention of the public, where for so many years this information was completely hidden. As Kevin mentioned earlier, he only first started learning about residential schools back 16, 17 years ago. It was not public knowledge what happened to the Native people of this land, of America, all through America and through Australia.
I've been amazed over the last number of years how much has come out, and yet the extent to which the government and the churches are still not taking responsibility. Stephen Harper in the apology didn't even refer to the missing children, although some of the party leaders did. The government and the churches have acknowledged thousands of children never came back, yet there's no accountability. Nobody's being charged with the disappearances. They're not talking about repatriating the remains. There's got to be what they would do if it happened to their children. We just wanted there to be one standard here. If it happened to 50,000 white children, there'd be criminal investigations, there'd be charges laid, the institutions would be held accountable. Under international human rights conventions, there'd be war crimes trials. You'd have the bodies returned for forensic and examination. You'd have memorial sites. You'd have this written up in the school textbooks. You'd make sure it didn't happen again. None of that's happening, and all of that has to occur if we're going to have a real healing on this, instead of just the verbal healing that's gone on up till now.